Okay, imagine this. You're rushing to get an 8-year-old out the door for school, and they casually mention they're running late because they were meditating on Plato.
Sounds like a sitcom.
Right. It's hilarious. But it also makes you wonder, where did they even hear about Plato? And what could an 8-year-old possibly be pondering about ancient philosophy? This is exactly the kind of delightful curveball that we're diving into today with Charlotte Mason and her surprisingly relevant ideas on moral education. We'll be exploring a fascinating excerpt from Volume 6 of The Parents' Review to understand how she tackles this topic.
And the Parents' Review was for like everyday parents, right? Just like grappling with raising thoughtful and ethical kids.
Yeah, it's refreshing. Because we often think of moral education as this heavy-handed thing full of lectures and rules, but Mason flips the script, doesn't she?
Absolutely. She starts with the idea that children are not blank slates. They're not morally deficient beings we need to whip into shape.
So where do we start? This is where it gets really interesting.
Mason argues that children are naturally endowed with love and justice. She uses these terms almost as inherent forces within each child, an innate capacity for moral feeling and action. And get this, she believes education shouldn't focus on instilling these qualities, but on giving them space to flourish.
Which honestly feels kind of radical even today. It goes against the grain of our instinct to lecture or punish our way to good behavior.
Yeah.
When we see other kids throwing tantrums in the grocery store, it's easy to think, well, my kid will know better because I'm going to lay down the law.
It was certainly countercultural in Mason's time. Back then, a more authoritarian approach was common strict discipline rote memorization of moral codes.
Right, the do as I say, not as I do approach. So how did Mason propose we nurture this inherent love and justice? She wasn't suggesting we just let kids run wild, was she?
Not at all. Mason believed in structure and discipline, but she saw them as creating fertile ground for moral growth, not controlling every decision. A key part of this was what she called moral feeding.
Okay, moral feeding. Tell me more. This sounds intriguing. Is it like sneaking vegetables into a smoothie?
In a way, it is. Imagine a well-balanced diet, but for the mind. Mason believed that children absorb moral lessons not through dry lectures, but through rich and engaging content, literature, history, science, art, you name it. She saw these as nourishing the moral imagination.
This is where that line about Peter Pan comes in, right? She talks about how a child might find their meat in something we adults might see as simple children's literature, which is fascinating because I bet you've had those moments where a child in your life latches onto a book or a movie and finds these profound messages in it that you as an adult completely missed.
Precisely. It makes you realize that they're not just passively absorbing information, they're actively making these moral connections in a way that we often overlook as adults.
So it's not about force-feeding them a specific moral takeaway.
Yeah.
It's about exposing them to a diverse cast of characters, different perspectives, allowing them to wrestle with big questions on their own terms.
Exactly. Mason saw children as active meaning makers, constantly observing, questioning, and drawing their own conclusions.
And she gives that example of children engaging deeply with Waverley, a pretty dense historical novel, and with art from different historical periods. It really makes you think twice about how much we underestimate kids' capabilities. They can handle complex themes and ideas if we give them the chance.
Absolutely. And this is where we get to a crucial part of Mason's approach. She was wary of explicit moralizing. She compares it to pre-digested food.
It's like those bland, mushy meals they give to babies just starting on solids. Not exactly appetizing. Why did Mason think direct moral lessons were so problematic?
Because they can backfire. When we spoon-feed children ready-made moral conclusions, it can stifle their natural curiosity and ability to think for themselves. They might learn to parrot back what we want to hear, but it doesn't necessarily lead to genuine moral development.
So instead of fostering true understanding and internalizing those values, we might actually be creating a kind of moral laziness. They're just following the rules without understanding the why.
That's a great way to put it. And I think this is so relevant today, maybe even more so than in Mason's time. We're constantly bombarded with messages about what's right and wrong.
Totally. Think about the pressure to instill specific values in kids, the debates around indoctrination versus exploration. It's a minefield for parents and educators to navigate.
And this leads us to another pillar of Mason's philosophy, cultivating justice in children.
And not just any kind of justice, right? She had a very particular understanding of this concept.
Precisely. Mason believed that a sense of justice is innate in children, but it needs to be nurtured and refined. She stresses the balance of rights and duties. There's this fantastic quote, "We each have our rights and other persons have their duties towards us as we towards them, but it is not easy to learn that we have precisely the same rights as other people and no more."
Wow, that's profound. It's so simple, yet it cuts to the heart of empathy. Respect, fairness, all those qualities we long for in a just society.
Exactly. And we see this play out in children all the time, right? That strong sense of what's fair, which can erupt in a flash if they feel slighted. But Mason's point is that we can channel this innate desire for fairness constructively by helping them understand their rights and responsibilities within a community.
And she doesn't stop there. She also links this sense of justice to other virtues like honesty and integrity.
Absolutely. She talks about the importance of integrity in material, meaning honesty in our work and actions, as stemming directly from this understanding of justice.
So it's not just about being fair in our interactions with others, but also about holding ourselves to that same standard of honesty and integrity in everything we do.
Precisely. And this, according to Mason, is directly tied to the development of justice in thought, which I find fascinating.
Okay, justice in thought. Now that's an intriguing phrase. It sounds like it's about more than just having the right opinions.
You're picking up what Mason's putting down. This is where she delves into the importance of cultivating critical thinking in children.
And this is where she throws us another curveball. She states, young people should leave school knowing that their thoughts are not their own. Wait, what does that even mean?
It's a provocative statement, right? Sounds counterintuitive at first, but I think she's getting at the importance of humility and open-mindedness.
So it's not that kids shouldn't think for themselves, but that they need to recognize how much our thoughts are shaped by external factors. Our upbringing, our culture, the information we consume. Basically, none of us are thinking in a vacuum.
Exactly. Justice in thought for Mason means being aware of those influences, questioning our own assumptions, and considering different viewpoints. It's understanding that we don't have a monopoly on truth.
Which, let's be real, is a lifelong challenge even for adults. We all have our biases.
Absolutely. And Mason was acutely aware of the dangers of unexamined thinking. She talks about how without thoughtful engagement, young minds are susceptible to empty slogans and popular opinions. She even uses the phrase, "it's all rot," as an example, which cracks me up every time.
Oh, how incredibly relevant is that today, with social media and the constant barrage of information, often lacking context or nuance. It's easy to see how catchy phrases and sound bites can take root in a mind that hasn't been taught to think critically.
It's like she could see the future of the internet. And this need for critical thinking ties back to her concept of justice in motive, which is a perfect segue to the next part of our deep dive. You know, when we talk about justice in motive, it makes you realize that doing the right thing isn't always enough. It's about understanding the why behind our actions. And for Mason, that's where education comes in. It's not just about moral instruction, but about cultivating a certain kind of intellectual and moral sensibility.
It's almost like she's saying that our motives are intertwined with our understanding of the world, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
That the richer our inner landscape, the more equipped we are to act with intention and integrity?
Exactly. And this is where Mason challenges some deeply held assumptions about education itself. She suggests that maybe, just maybe, we've been focusing on the wrong things.
You mean instead of drilling those 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, I have to admit, even bringing those up makes me think about boring worksheets and standardized tests. Not exactly inspiring, is it?
Not exactly. And Mason would argue that this narrow focus on practical skills neglects something fundamental. Our innate capacity for wonder, for moral reasoning, for connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
It's like we're so busy preparing children for the real world that we forget to nurture the very things that make life worth living. It makes you wonder, what does it mean to be well educated? Is it just about getting a good job?
It's a question worth asking. And Mason offers a different perspective. She reminds us that children aren't empty vessels waiting to be filled with knowledge. Remember how she describes their desire to learn as pathetically eager? It's such a funny yet accurate way to put it.
Pathetically eager. It really captures that almost desperate hunger for knowledge that kids have. You see it all the time. A child utterly absorbed in a book, a bug, a philosophical question, completely oblivious to the world around them. They have this natural curiosity that we often try to tame or control when we should be celebrating it.
Precisely. And Mason challenges us to tap into that curiosity, to see it as a strength. And here's the best part. She argues that this thirst for knowledge isn't limited to any particular subject. Children, she believes, are capable of engaging with big, complex ideas from a young age, whether it's history, literature, science, even philosophy.
Which reminds me of that story she tells about children in a poor school deeply engaging with Waverly, that dense historical novel we talked about earlier. It really challenges those assumptions we often have about what children are capable of understanding.
Absolutely. Mason firmly believed that we consistently underestimate children's intellectual and emotional capacities. And here's the kicker. She points out that this hunger for knowledge isn't hindered by a lack of resources or even a so-called literary background. In fact, she suggests that these things can be incentives to learning.
It's like that saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When children are truly hungry for knowledge, they'll find a way to satisfy that hunger, even if it means overcoming obstacles.
Exactly. And I think that's a really empowering message, especially for those of us who work with children from diverse backgrounds. It reminds us that every child, regardless of their circumstances, has the potential to become a passionate, lifelong learner.
And the way she backs up her claims with those real-world examples, it's amazing. She describes how these children from impoverished areas can recount the entire story of Waverly with such detail and insight using the author's language and style. They can talk about the Rosetta Stone, analyze Shakespeare, discuss artifacts from their local museums. It really broadens our perspective of what's possible.
It does. And it speaks to the power of providing children with access to high-quality literature, art, and ideas. Remember, Mason wasn't advocating for a watered-down curriculum. She believed that children thrive when challenged, when exposed to the very best that human thought has to offer.
And it's not just about memorizing facts, right? She emphasizes that these children can tell it with power, clearness, vivacity, and charm. They're not just regurgitating information, they're internalizing it, making it their own, connecting with it on a deeper, almost visceral level.
Exactly. And wouldn't you say is the hallmark of true learning? It's when we can absorb new information, synthesize it, and then communicate it in a way that's both engaging and insightful.
It makes you wonder, what would happen if we approached all education with this same philosophy? What if we truly believe that every child is pathetically eager for knowledge, capable of tackling big questions, and deserving of the very best that human culture has to offer? It's a beautiful vision.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it leads us to another vital aspect of Mason's approach, her emphasis on the role of the teacher in cultivating that pathetic eagerness and guiding those explorations.
Because let's face it, even the most intellectually curious child needs some guidance.
Right.
Someone to open those doors and show them what's possible.
Precisely. And that's where Mason's ideas about discipline and structure come into play. It's not about letting children run wild and learn whatever they want whenever they want. She recognized the need for a framework for thoughtful guidance from adults who understand both the needs of the child and the richness of the material being explored.
So it's about striking that balance between nurturing a child's natural curiosity and providing the structure and support they need to truly flourish.
Exactly. And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore Mason's nuanced and often surprising views on the role of the teacher in fostering a love of learning and cultivating that justice and motive that we've been talking about. Stay with us.
It's amazing how in this exploration of Charlotte Mason, we keep coming back to this idea of balance, right? Like with moral education, it's not about force-feeding kids specific values, but nurturing this inherent justice that she believed they already have. And now we're seeing how finding that balance is crucial in teaching too.
It really is. We can't just surround kids with books and hope for the best. They need guidance, especially when those ideas can be pretty complex. And Mason had some strong opinions on what makes a good teacher.
So for her, it wasn't about being super strict and rigid, right? What did she see as the teacher's primary role?
More like a facilitator, even a co-explorer, I'd say. She talks about how the teacher has to have that genuine love for knowledge themselves. It's contagious, that kind of enthusiasm that just sparks curiosity in others.
It's like they're not just teaching, they're sharing something they truly love.
Yeah.
Makes me think of those teachers who light up when they talk about a subject. They're not just going through the motions.
And that goes back to living books. Remember how Mason felt about textbooks? Just dry and dull? She wanted kids to encounter ideas in their most engaging form through stories, first-hand accounts, real experiences.
So the teacher's there to help navigate those richer, maybe more challenging materials.
Exactly. Not to tell them what to think, but to get them thinking. Yeah. Asking those thought-provoking questions, pushing them to analyze, to connect the dots between ideas, even across different subjects.
Almost like an intellectual tour guide, pointing out interesting things along the way, but ultimately students are free to make their own discoveries.
I like that analogy. And this approach, it wasn't just about keeping kids engaged. It built those critical thinking skills that are crucial for that justice and thought we talked about.
Because it's never been about memorizing facts and figures, right? It's about learning how to think critically, question assumptions, consider different viewpoints, skills you need throughout life.
And that's where Mason's ideas are still so relevant today. It's not about creating robots who can pass a test, but nurturing thoughtful, engaged, ethical people.
It's about recognizing those inherent qualities of love and justice, and then creating the environment where they can truly thrive.
Exactly. And while some might have found her methods a bit radical at the time, they offer a timeless guide for us now as we raise and educate future generations.
I couldn't agree more. It's about going beyond just the basics and embracing a bigger vision for education, one that feeds the mind, the heart, and the soul.
And empowers children to become seekers of truth, beauty, and goodness.
To become, as Mason put it, citizens of the world of knowledge. Wow, that's powerful.
It really is. It makes you think, what if we all embraced a little bit of Charlotte Mason's philosophy in our own lives, approached learning and life itself with that same sense of wonder?
A worthy challenge, for sure. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Charlotte Mason. We hope you'll keep these ideas in mind even as our conversation ends here.